Well, Mike and Scott spoke to you a little bit about some of the polity that's involved in our current division. And I just want to take just an opportunity to back up and provide you that may not know a little bit of a refresher on our polity and how we can get out of this mess that we're in, hopefully. Dr. Kisker did a wonderful job of talking about the theological differences, because our differences are much deeper than the human sexuality debate, although the human sexuality debate is the presenting issue. And so just for the sake of clarity for those that may not know, I want to set out to you the current position of the United Methodist Church regarding homosexuality. The Book of Discipline in paragraph 161.g says, "We affirm that all persons are individuals of sacred worth, created in the image of God. All persons need the ministry of their church in their struggles for human fulfillment, as well as the spiritual and emotional care of a fellowship that enables reconciling relationships with God, with others, and with self. The United Methodist Church does not condone the practice of homosexuality and considers this practice incompatible with Christian teaching. We affirm that God's grace is available to all. We will seek to live together in Christian community, welcoming, forgiving, and loving one another as Christ has loved and accepted us. We implore families and churches not to reject or condemn lesbian and gay members and friends. We commit ourselves to be in ministry for and with all persons." That's our current standard, and it's been in our Book of Discipline for many, many years. And that is actually the particular paragraph that is under debate. That's the paragraph that progressive folks would like to change to include, to affirm the practice of homosexuality. And so let us be clear, in the discipline there is a distinction between how we regard practices and how we regard persons. Persons are loved, persons are accepted, persons are valued, persons are recipients of and participants in the ministry of the church. We can, however, we must, however, exercise discretion and discernment in regard to practices and their sinfulness. And so to that end, currently, self-avowed practicing homosexuals may not serve as pastors in the United Methodist Church, nor may ceremonies celebrating same-sex unions be performed in our churches or by our clergy. And so if you were wondering, what is all this about? Well, it's about a bunch of things, and it's about broader theological issues, but really the human sexuality debate really comes down to whether you agree with or disagree with the current position of the United Methodist Church as I've outlined it, and whether you want to change it. So as I promised, a refresher course on United Methodist polity. Mike and Scott did a wonderful job talking about the history and where we've been with all of that, but just in case you're out there wondering, what do all these terms mean? General Conference is the largest body of the church. It's the only body that speaks for the whole church. It's the body that adopted the paragraph of discipline that I just read to you, and it's the only body that can change it. It's made up of about 800 delegates from all the annual conferences all over the world, and interestingly, about 40% historically, and actually approaching a majority now, of the United Methodist Church does not live in the United States. In fact, the largest portion of our church advocating for traditional values and traditional marriage is coming out of our African annual conferences. It meets every 4 years, usually. Our last regular meeting, as Mike said, was in 2016 in Portland, and we also had a special general conference in 2019 in St. Louis that adopted what has come to be known as the traditional plan. We were to have met in May of 2020 in Minneapolis. However, that has been rescheduled now due to COVID for August and September of 2022. Beneath the General Conference, there are a couple of general bodies. The first is the Council of Bishops. It's made up of all the bishops of the United Methodist Church. The Judicial Council, which is made up of 9 members, both lay and clergy, which acts as the church's Supreme Court, and our general boards and agencies that run the day-to-day operations of the general church. There are jurisdictional conferences in the U.S. and central conferences outside of the U.S., whose main function is to elect bishops. Within each jurisdiction, there is a college of bishops, not to be confused with the Council of Bishops, that is, as Scott said, the body that holds bishops accountable. It's the only body that holds bishops accountable, is that jurisdictional college of bishops. Once bishops are elected, they're only accountable to themselves in that region, which is a problem. The annual conferences, like our Iowa annual conference, is the basic body of the church, and it's the body to which clergy belong, to which churches belong. And those annual conferences are divided into districts, in our case currently in Iowa, 5 districts. Then you get down to local churches that are governed by charge conferences, which is where most of us spend most of our ministry. Leading worship, teaching Sunday school, singing in choirs, taking care of children. That's where ministry happens. All this bureaucracy that's above, it was meant to be ministry, and it's become bureaucracy. However, one important thing to note about the discipline as it regards to local churches is the trust clause. That is, the fact that the property, the physical property of the local church, is held by the local church's board of trustees in trust for the denomination. That is, ultimately, that property devolves to the denomination. All that is meant to set us up for the discussion, as Mike alluded, to the protocol of reconciliation and grace through separation, also known as the protocol. In the aftermath of a special general conference in 2019 and the uproar that was caused after the upholding of the traditional Christian values of marriage, a group of 16 leaders representing progressive, centrist, traditionalist views, representing bishops, representing folks from outside of the United States, a group of 16 people from a broad range of perspectives gathered with a professional mediator and developed a plan for the separation of the church. There were at that time a few different plans circulating for how to divide the church, and some of those people came together to form the protocol. The protocol allows for the formation of new denominations to separate from the United Methodist Church. Now, General Conference must approve this plan. This plan is right now simply pieces of legislation that has been presented to the General Conference, but nothing can happen with the protocol until General Conference actually meets, again, hopefully in August of 2022. So under the protocol, the central conferences, those regional bodies outside of the United States, can separate with a 2/3 majority vote. Annual conferences like Iowa can choose to separate from the United Methodist Church with a 57% majority. And local churches, by default, will remain with their annual conferences unless they vote not to do so. And your church council, your leadership team, your administrative council, whatever you call it, where you are, will decide whether or not to call a charge conference to take a vote, and also will decide whether a 2/3 majority or a simple majority will be required. And if a local church chooses to separate, it will be able to keep its property and its assets, and the new denomination will assume the pension liability. That's kind of the two big financial pieces of this, is the trust clause with property and our continued pension responsibilities to our retired clergy. But all those would be cared for under the protocol. So as of right now, it looks like there may be as many as 3 different denominations that have emerged, or at least there's 3 different groups that have spoken into this interest in the protocol. The United Methodist Church will remain intact. It will continue to exist and will more likely move toward LGBTQ plus ordination and same-sex marriage. An even more progressive group is beginning to form itself, called the Liberation Methodist Connection, or the LMX. Meanwhile, the Wesleyan Covenant Association and others have been working to form a new denomination called the Global Methodist Church, or the GMC. And Andy Rubenking is going to say more about that in a moment. So, what are our next steps? Well, after General Conference meets in, again, hopefully August of 2022, annual conferences will have an opportunity to meet to decide whether they will remain in the UMC or align with one of these other groups. And then local churches will have the opportunity to make that same decision for their local bodies. But for now, we wait, we trust God, and we continue to be faithful in the ministries God has us doing right now.